Palisade Radio is brought to you by First Majestic Silver Corp., one of the world's purest and fastest growing silver mining companies.
Welcome back to another episode of Palisade Radio. This is your host, Colin Cattell. As you can see on our screen, we have Rick Rule back for another Palisade Sprott monthly market update. Rick, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Colin.
You know, I want to try to step outside the box a little bit today. We can talk about is the market in a bull market. It seems pretty obvious. We can talk about where you expect gold to be, but nobody really knows. So I want to ask you some outside questions, and something we've touched on several times in the past is the streaming and royalty companies. The streamers and the royalty companies are something that have done quite well over the past few years, and you've said on the show before that you think they'll continue to perform well. But now that equity is more available, at least to the small companies, and I would assume that at some point debt's going to become more available, will it be harder for these streaming companies to prey on the best assets and get very good streams?
Well, I think prey is the wrong phrase. I think the streaming and royalty companies have been a useful source of capital when capital was hard to come by. My suspicion is that the smaller companies will have more options than royalty and stream. But I still believe that the three biggies, Franco-Nevada, Silver Wheaton, and Royal Gold, have major opportunities in the next 18 to 24 months to provide desperately needed capital for the base metals and industrial materials sectors. You'll recall in earlier interviews, but it's worth recalling again for those that didn't hear them, that byproduct precious metals revenues in a company that's considered by the market to be a base metals company trade in the market at between 5 and 7 times EBITDA. Those same revenues structured as a precious metal stream in Franco-Nevada or Royal Gold or Silver Wheaton trade at 15 to 20 times EBITDA. So a transaction can take place transferring that revenue from a base metals company to a precious metals royalty company that is accretive to both parties, and both parties in a very large sense. The base metals companies between new build capital and particularly sustaining capital have the need for about $15 billion in the next 2 years. And because their cash flows have been constrained and their market caps are small, it may be for some of them that the only source of capital they have available to them for sustaining capital or for debt service or debt repayment are royalty and streams. And the possibility exists of some very, very large transactions between base metals companies and royalty and streaming companies. So as big as the business is, it has the ability in the next 18 to 24 months to grow much larger.
It appears that a very strong trend is in place with these gold miners and the exploration stocks, but there hasn't really been a major catalyst at this point. I want to ask you if you think that a major catalyst or the major catalyst or what's going to really kick this bull market into a long-term trend. Is that going to be something like a discovery, or do you expect just the political nature going on right now, the interest rates, Fed policy is going to be what continues to drive things?
Right now, I think it's macro factors, as you've described. I think the fact that the gold price is up some and that the gold equities have responded so well. My own belief in the gold equities is that we're in the midst of a momentum trade. They were under-owned. The gold moved. They started to move. And in particular, the Canadian generalist institutional investor had to be in the sector. A lot of those guys are closet indexers, and gold and resources in Canada is 30 or 35% of the index. When you had a generalist that was 5% exposed to the only sector that was moving, he or she literally had to be in place. So you have had funds flows into the precious metals mining side that were more sort of market related than fundamentally related. I would point out that the gold price is up, 17, 18%? And the gold equities, as represented by most indexes, are up 70% or so. My suspicion is in the very near term, if we don't get a follow through in the gold price, that we may see some weakness in the junior end of the gold equities. That's not a forecast, just an observation. a correction in a bull market is normal and natural, and a market that has advanced as far and as fast as this one is normally needs to consolidate its gains. But one micro factor that you pointed to, I think, bears pointing out, and that is that we've had a reasonable number, not a large number, but a reasonable number of transactions taking place. Transactions crystallize value, they add hope, and they add liquidity. So the one micro factor that we do need to look at is transactions. What you described as a possibility, that is a big discovery, would of course really shake up the market. You're probably too young, Colin, to recall the discovery market that we had in the early part of the 1990s. But that generated the most spectacular, most dramatic up moves I have ever seen in the junior space. And a big discovery, particularly a big precious metals discovery, would really, really juice this market were it to occur.
Yeah, and speaking of activity, recently Kaminak up in the Yukon was just taken over by Gold Corp. As I said in this interview, I'm going to be jumping around a bit, just trying to ask you a bunch of out-of-the-box questions. But what's the importance of the Kaminak takeover, if anything? It's sizable but not huge. And do you like the Yukon? What does this mean for the Yukon?
I don't think it means much for the Yukon myself. That was a unique deposit in terms of its grade, in terms of its metallurgy, and also in terms of its exploration upside. I think it says something for the exploration process. High-quality deposits are rare, and when they are discovered, they go for fairly fulsome prices. Another example would be reservoir minerals, where one acquirer, Lundin Mining, tried to buy the majority stake from Freeport, and another acquirer, Nevson, came over the top, bid for reservoir, up 100%, by the way, in 6 months, and allowed reservoir to take the majority stake itself. High-quality deposits are rare, and high-quality deposits will sell at very, very good premiums, even after the stocks have run.
Historically speaking, Rick, where are we right now in terms of exploration? There has been quite a bit of takeover activity. I haven't been around long enough to compare this point in the cycle to ones of the past. Are there a lack of ounces out there? Is there an urgent need for more ounces to be discovered if you've looked at this? And with an extension of that question is, how much exposure do you have to these exploring companies?
Absolutely an urgent need. You know, in the last exploration cycle that we experienced, the one that was through the beginning and the middle of the last decade, the truth is that many of the exploration dollars spent by the juniors were misspent. They weren't spent looking for minerals, they were spent looking for markets. And by that I mean that the great Canadian paper hanging machine, rather than looking for high quality greenfield deposits, sort of retreaded properties that had failed in 2 or 3 prior bull markets, where they knew that they could twin the one good existing hole on a project. And they were looking to mine markets rather than mine deposits. One of the reasons why so few discoveries were made relative to the dollars that were spent was because the promoters weren't actually looking for discoveries. They were looking for salaries, and they were looking for a pop in the market. The consequence of that is that although a reasonable amount of money was spent in the last decade, very few discoveries resulted from it. A second problem is that discoverers, for good reasons and for bad, are mostly sticking to tried and true terrain, which they feel, sometimes rightly, sometimes wrongly, is politically secure. If you look where discoveries have taken place, I'm looking particularly to Robert Friedland, but also to Platinum Group Metals, the real large, real world-scale discoveries are taking places in places like Serbia, politically risky, Congo, politically risky, South Africa, politically risky. The truth is that the chances of discovering 10 or 15 million ounces in Timmins or Abitibi, particularly easy to find, non-buried ounces, are very, very low. You have to go to places that have been improperly explored. Just as you have to take exploration risk, you have to take some political and social risk to make big, valuable discoveries.
I think over the last couple years, I've had a lot of people on the show talking about how this bull market would be different from the last one or the one before that, in that people had learned their lesson and money wouldn't be misallocated. But just in the first 3 to 4 months, I've seen so many of the worst offenders of past bull markets coming out of the woodworks and raising money for projects that really don't deserve it. And yet, it's hard to tell people not to take a shotgun approach in the junior sector, because some of what look to be the worst deals or things that aren't real end up making you 4 or 5 times your money very quickly. I guess this is an open-ended question, but how do you deal with this situation as an investor? What's the point of looking for the quality when money can be made this way?
I'm perfectly happy to avoid making 4 or 5 times my money backing a scamster where the probability is that he or she will end up in failure. The truth is that over time, good people will make you good money. It's interesting that you use the phrase shotgun in the context of bad people. I'll leave the rest of that statement to your imagination. But the truth is, I don't miss at all not buying a 10-cent stock that goes to 50 cents, and instead concentrating my efforts on people like Bob Quartermain, Ross Beatty, Robert Friedland, Lucas Lundin. The truth is that by hanging out with Ross Beatty, I was involved in taking Pan American Silver from 50 cents to $45. I was involved in taking Lumina Copper from 50 cents to $140. By the way, real number. So I'll pass up the odd 5-bagger where the odds are against me in favor of the slim possibility of a 100-bagger where the odds are for me. Discipline and rationality is what sets apart the successful long-term speculator. You know, in the very near term, markets are voting machines, but in the long term, markets are weighing machines. If you are comfortable with the way people vote, as an example, in the elections that we're having in the United States, maybe you want to hang out with the scamsters that ignore value in the near term. But the truth is that money is made over time in an arbitrage between stupidity and reality. Stupidity measured by the voters, reality measured by reserves.
Thank you for that, Rick. One of the biggest booms over the last 6 to 8 months has been lithium. We don't need to get into that because we did an entire interview based around that just a couple months ago. A new energy metal that's just being recognized by the market and is the biggest component of a battery is cobalt. And there are a couple cobalt companies out there, but the rush that hit graphite years ago and lithium most recently has yet to come to cobalt. I know you like long-term investments, so I'll ask the question this way. Do you expect at least a short-term boom coming in cobalt in the near future?
Yes, I do. I don't know that it'll follow through in the stock market because to look for cobalt, you have to go to Russia or you have to go to Congo. And most of the promoters of these sort of things couldn't imagine anything worse than having to go to unpleasant countries looking for people. What I suspect that you might get is nickel as cobalt in drag. In other words, what you might get is people pretending to be looking for cobalt in the Canadian Shield, in Timmins, in Ungava, and places like that. People who use the cobalt story to raise money for nickel exploration, much as I did, frankly, in the early 1990s with platinum. Both FNX and Aurora Platinum, which later merged, were in effect nickel exploration stocks in platinum clothing. And I suspect you'll see that in cobalt. What you really need to do, what you really need to know in the context of cobalt is mostly northern Russia, the Norilsk region, and Congo.
Very well. Well, Rick, I got one more out of the box question. It's a company that I believe Eric Sprott's invested in. It's called BitGold, and it's had a tremendous amount of upside in the stock. They've had huge adoption rates, but for me, BitGold is going to be a little bit difficult in the long term potentially because people don't necessarily want to transact and lose 1% on both sides of a trade and might end up storing gold with BitGold, which doesn't necessarily work for their model. What's your feeling on the company?
Colin, you're younger than I and better able to appreciate the technology than I. We have made a lot of money on BitGold. People have commented on the Sprott selling in BitGold. But the truth is, in the market that we inhabited last year, a stock that's up 500% is a rarity. And at Sprott, we've learned that the backside of a hockey stick chart is just as steep as the front side. I'm attracted to BitGold in the sense that I am attracted to gold and I am attracted to the ability to use gold as money rather than merely as a store of wealth. I'm also extremely attracted to the two young gentlemen who are the primary drivers behind BitGold. For myself, although I'm an owner of BitGold in my own account rather than in client accounts, it's difficult for me to justify that market cap based on the cash flow generated by BitGold. One who would properly be able to analyze that stock would be much more likely to be a technology or a social media analyst rather than a resource or a credit analyst like myself. I own it because I no longer have any investment in it, meaning that I have recovered my investment out of it 1 time over. And I'm keeping a residual portion to see if these guys can pull off what they say they can pull off. This is highly risky. Don't try this at home unless you're much better informed about social media adoption rates and technology than I.
All right, Rick, many thank yous for coming back on the program. You do this every single month with us. Anything else you'd like to add in context of the market or for people to reach out to you, please go ahead.
Well, in terms of reaching out to me, I'd like to reiterate my proposal to your listeners, hundreds of whom have taken me up on the offer, which is to evaluate and rank the resource companies in your portfolio. Send me your portfolio in the text of the letter, not as an attachment, with both the name and the symbol. Send it to contacts@sprottglobal.com, and I will send you back a ranking 1 through 10, the way Sprott sees it right now, of the resource companies, in your portfolio. Hundreds of your viewers and listeners have taken me up on the offer, and it's something that we continue to like to do. We spend about $3.5 million a year on information gathering and analysis at Sprott, and we are willing on a no obligation basis to share some of that with your listeners and subscribers.
Great, and one thing I'd like to add is that we will be attending at Palisade the Sprott conference, which will be taking place in Vancouver on July 26th and 27th. Of course, you'll be there, Rick, as will Eric Sprott and other world-renowned people in the resource space. And I'd invite all of our listeners to sign up. It's a low price for the amount of knowledge that one will gain and, of course, the contacts one can make by attending. Rick, thank you again for coming on the show.
Thanks, Colin, and thanks for refreshing my memory about my own conference. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Think you understand the junior mining sector and you think that the participants in the mining sector, junior mining sector, are good people and kind people, hit the bid.
And the world is always going to need raw materials. It's going to need copper and gold and nickel and so forth.
Totally destabilized. Hey, Troll, did you hear what's going on in Yemen? Or are you too stupid?